Lovely to see you all. Okay, I think pretty much everybody's on. If we have anybody more, we'll just let them in. I wanted to welcome you all this evening. I'm Patricia Tomlinson. I'm curator at the Appleton Museum of Art, and this is our virtual series, The Artist's Outlook, where we talk to artists about their experiences, what inspires them. So you're hearing firsthand from the artists themselves what makes them tick, what makes them produce the wonderful art they do. So without further ado, I would love to introduce tonight's fabulous featured artist, Kenda North. She's a gifted photographer, and I will let her introduce herself briefly. Kenda?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Kenda, and I'm here at Patricia's invitation. And I really want to thank Patricia and Colleen and the entire team at the Appleton Museum of Art for setting this up and being so gracious to give me a chance to talk.
Well, it's lovely to have you, and we appreciate your time. We have 3 glorious pieces of yours, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But first, I kind of wanted to get into the general things of kind of what inspires you. Do you have a particular person, mentors, kind of what inspires you to create your art, Kenda?
Well, I've been very fortunate in that I think I've said I wanted to be an artist since I was a small child. I grew up in Chicago, and my mother was this very strong woman and an optometrist. And we would walk down Michigan Avenue to the Art Institute, my sister and I, to take art lessons. And I still walk into that building and have this sort of incredible sigh that it has been with me for so long. So I guess in short, I'm inspired by art. I love paintings. I look at Matisse. I look at Milton Avery for colors. I mean, I guess a lot of painters, because those are the kinds of things that are really important to me in my work.
Well, and I think that's very obvious. And then when we get the slides of your work up soon, pardon me, I think that'll really show you are, from what I can see, you're very drawn to color. So that's a big part of how you work. And it's interesting that that you're more drawn for inspiration to paintings than to other photographers. I think it's always really interesting to hear whether people kind of follow forebears in their genre or if they follow forebears in another genre. So that's really kind of fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about your process. What inspires you? Well, I guess I should back up and say, why photography? I mean, you're a very gifted person. How did you get into that instead of, for example, painting or something else?
You know, I started photographing as a teenager in Chicago, probably out of rebellion, because that's what we all did in those years, right? And I've just always loved being behind the camera. So, you know, it was, for me, like many of my colleagues, the shift to digital was a difficult transition. But I've grown to love it, and it's very exciting. It just has opened up so many opportunities for us. But yeah, I've just always loved being behind the camera.
So you are digital now, and you don't ever go in dark rooms and do any of that good stuff?
You know, when I was still teaching, it was a bit ago, but I taught a darkroom course. And I would walk into the darkroom, and my body had a response that said, I don't like this. You know, I spent so many years around those chemicals that no, I have no desire to go back into it again.
Well, it's really interesting you should mention that. I've spoken to another photographer recently, and she had a very similar response. She said, I don't want to be around those toxic chemicals. I'm not doing any more darkroom work. That's it, finito. So that's,
Yeah, because it, excuse me, it was cumulative. And so your body keeps ingesting and ingesting. And I just remember walking in and getting that big smell of fixer and my body going, no, we don't really want this. So, no.
no, that makes perfect sense. The perfect.
But I just heard from someone teaching a darkroom course, there is nothing more magic than taking a student in and exposing the paper and putting it in the tray and having an image come up. It's so completely magical. So, I mean, I think if people can take that opportunity, it's a wonderful thing.
I agree with you. I am not, I'll be honest, I'm not a photographer at all, but it is, especially to me who doesn't do it, when you kind of see it emerging, there is something magical about that. There's kind of a necromancy to photography.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how you approach your work with your subjects. Are these friends of yours? Are these models? All of the above?
I would say primarily friends. Yeah, friends. Or sometimes I'll just see someone. I remember seeing a good friend of mine, his daughter came to a party we were at, and she was wearing this incredible multi-layered slip. And I just said, you need to model for me. So, I mean, that will happen. Yeah, I'm working on some new work underwater, and I just started to talk to people today about modeling for me.
Oh, fun. Wonderful. Yeah. So, okay, that brings me kind of to my next question, and we can get into this a little more deeply when we have your images on the screen, but why water? What does that mean to you?
Well, again, I was raised in Chicago and spent most of my life on a boat on Lake Michigan. I love to swim. And after I moved to Dallas, my first thought in the summer was just to leave. And so I would take my girls and go visit my sister in the Northwest. But then, you know, then I've just had an idea. Someone had an old Nikonos film camera. The Nikon made an underwater camera that took 35 millimeter film. And I borrowed it, and I asked a young teenager to model for me, and he was wearing at the time these huge bell-bottom jeans. And I just thought, I wonder what they'll look like underwater. And that gave me then something to work on all summer when the heat makes it too oppressive to really do much else. So I do underwater, and then I'll often take off on another thing, another project, and then I often go back to the underwater.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. So let's look at some of your work. I'll go to the slides here so we can start enjoying those. So we've put these in chronological order. So Kenda's earlier work is what you all will see first, those of you who are tuning in tonight, and then her more recent work, and then the three pieces that we own at the Appleton Museum of Art. So Kenda, would you like to kind of orient us to this piece, please?
Sure. I mentioned this to you when you disappeared.
I'm sorry?
Can you see me?
Yes.
Oh, well, you disappeared from me, but I'll see what happens. When I started into photography, I was always very interested in color. And at the time, color photography was not well regarded by the art community or the photography community. I mean, it had been rooted in black and white for so long. And color was largely thought to be vulgar. It was associated with snapshots or commercial photography. Patricia, I have lost the link, so I'm going to just try to do it again.
Okay, well, I can see you and see and hear you.
Okay, that's good.
So I think we're good. Let me interrupt you. Colleen, can you see and hear Kenda?
I see her and I see both of you side by side.
Okay, so I think we're okay, Kenda. I think maybe your screen is on a particular view.
Okay. So during this time, I decided that I would study the best way to make a color photograph. I had taught myself how to print color, talk about a bunch of chemicals. Oh my goodness. And the old type C processing, the final thing that you would pour into the processor was, the stuff was just deadly. But I studied with someone to learn how to do dye transfer photography. So it's a very complex process and I don't want to spend time explaining it, but what I was able to do was figure out if I could hand color my images. So I would take the 3 primary printing colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow, which, as they say, can make all colors. Then I would make my own. So I would have jars of flesh tones and jars of beach tones and jars of sky tones, and hand apply the dyes to the image. So these pictures were all hand done and one of a kind. And they kind of launched my career.
Well, and how long does that take? Because that sounds incredibly intricate.
Oh, it took a while, but the nice thing was that I would hand color them in the daylight. So I wasn't locked in the dark room. So I got you back again. So that made it doable.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm going to ask the question because I asked it and I know the answer, but it is tempting to think that this individual is you and that this is a self-portrait. However,
no. I was literally walking on the beaches, either Chicago or Southern California, and standing over people. It was sort of a Gary Winogrand rude kind of imposition into someone. But you know, most people when they're sunbathing, they just have their eyes closed and they don't know what's going on anyway.
Wonderful. So let's go to the next one. So this one was from 1977. So here's another sunbather from 1978. Would you like to discuss this a little, please?
Yeah, this was, it's funny, I'm reconnecting with a lot of the people from this time. I was doing a lot of workshops in Sun Valley and Breckenridge, Colorado, about this process. So teaching students how I would get all these materials and they would shoot film, and you know, we would study how to make a dye transfer print. So this was at a hot springs in Colorado. And it's just, you know, I've always loved the color blue. Obviously I still do. Yeah. So again, I don't have that many of these prints. It's really amazing. I just got an email through my website from a museum in Belgium, and they said, we have a sunbather's print by you. Will you give us permission to use it digitally? And I said, of course. And then I said, can I see an image of it? And yeah, it was from the late 70s. It was like really lovely.
That's wonderful. And one of the things, this is an excellent piece to bring up something that I've noticed in your art. You have a definite mysterious, almost fairy tale-like kind of imagery in some of your work. Is that intentional?
No,
Okay.
I think that's just what, I mean, I don't deliberately try to do that. I guess it's just something that's in me.
Okay, because I mean, to me, this almost looks like the Little Mermaid, you know? I mean, you
Uh,
can't really see her legs, so you don't know what's going on under there, and it could be a mermaid, and it's, you know, and you can't see her face, so that's deliciously mysterious as well.
Now, that's interesting because you'll notice that very few of my photographs, if any, have a face in them. And I think at some point in my career, some people took exception to that. They felt like it was sort of a feminist position of, if you're not showing the individual, are you just objectifying the body? And I can only say that I always considered my work to be figurative, meaning dealing with the figure and not really a portrait. It was not dealing with trying to reveal something about a specific person. So I've managed for a long time to avoid people's faces in my pictures.
Well, and of course, there's the other than making the person anonymous in a rude way, there's also, of course, the thought process that when you obscure the face, the viewer can imagine themselves in that position. I'm from Colorado. I've been to many hot springs, and this reminds me of me getting my hair out of the way, sitting in these wonderful springs.
Lovely, lovely. Well, and of course, that's why you can't see her body, because those hot springs are very murky. They're not crystal clear.
True, true. Well, let's look at the next one. Now, this one's a bit, compared to the first two, this one's a wee bit of a departure. So this is 1985.
In the 80s, I was one of many, many photographers, fine art photographers, who were invited to go to the Polaroid studios and use the 20 by 24 Polaroid camera. Edwin Land had developed it. And as I understand it, it was largely something he wanted to use at the Boston Museum of Art to make reproductions of paintings on a large enough scale. So the first time I went to the studios, it was seriously a bunch of all men in lab coats were the people helping. And they were, of course, very, very interested in the possibility of how detailed these images could be and how stunning they could reproduce reality. And I was never interested in using color to reproduce reality. I was more interested in finding out how to communicate my vision with a process. And so I went back, I think, to the Polaroid studios 4 or 5 times. And I brought in fig models. It was harder because going to a city that I didn't live in, I had to find people. And fortunately, there's a wonderful man, John Reuter, who became like the main interface between the artists and the technology. And John was really good, and he didn't wear a lab coat. But so, I mean, I didn't have any training in studio lighting, so I could just say, well, I want some blue over here and some red over here, and let's put red on the background and sort of create this. And we would hit the shutter, and very early I learned that if I left the shutter open for a period of time, I would get that kind of fuzziness that it's really almost a time exposure. It is a timed exposure. So she's breathing, and the strobe would go off, but then there'd be this other additional time where the model was. So you could, like the kimono she's sitting on would be tack sharp, but she's not going to be tack sharp. So, and they're 20 by 24 in size.
Which is really big.
Well, at the time, you know, this is pre-digital. We thought that was huge.
Well, I do love the juxtaposition. You already pointed this out. I love the juxtaposition of the soft focus of her wonderful back versus the very crisp imagery of the flowers, the chrysanthemums, and I guess these are maybe, I don't know what they are, but anyway, of the other flowers on the kimonos. That's a very nice juxtaposition.
Thank you.
So let's look at another one.
So Patricia, could you go back one?
Absolutely, I apologize. Yes.
Back one more.
Oh, one more. Okay, gotcha. Yep.
So another thing that's interesting about this image for anyone who's of the period, you notice that there's this thick line around it. And of course, photographers would use that. When you went into the dark room, you would file out the negative carrier and print the border. And it was sort of the statement of, I don't crop. It was sort of a big deal in the 70s. So I really loved it because my black border would be blue or green or whatever I would make it. So in the Polaroid, those edges also became really interesting because the Polaroid camera, can you go to the next one again? At the Polaroid, the Polaroid negative to the positive would come together and they would go through these rollers, and the rollers would push through a pod, and the Polaroid goop, sorry, that people know, the goop would be, see, it's coming out along the top. So it was sort of a really interesting part of the process that was very much marked on the image.
Thank you for explaining that, because yeah, you can see it very clearly across the top here, and there's almost like a little bubble.
Yeah.
Interesting. Goop. Okay. So are we good to go to urban pools?
Yes.
So I love so much about this one because obviously it's fabulous retro feel. The bright saturated red with the gorgeous blue, that's a beautiful transition. And then you get to her pale skin. But of course, also she's underwater and she's must be a master at holding her breath.
And not only that, people forget, I mean, everybody thinks, you know, they get afraid of drowning or whatever, but you float. And so how she was able to keep herself down on the chair was astounding. I don't know how she did it. But yeah, she brought the suit, I had the chair. So it was really a fun image to make.
So let me ask you this, did you specify that the model had to be an individual that could hold their breath and be underwater for a finite period of time?
Yeah, I always ask people, are you comfortable in water? Are you comfortable swimming? Because in order to go sink in the water, you have to expel as much air as possible. And so it does, and of course, then I'll get the model to sink and then I will sink. And then we do some photographing and then we both have to go up and maybe laugh or just start to breathe and then go down again. So it's kind of a dance. Yeah, it's a good workout.
It sounds really fun. I would almost love to see a video of you doing just what you described. I think that would be fascinating to see. So maybe something to think about.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So let's go on to another one. Now, of course, this is figurative without a figure, but I definitely see a form here.
Yeah, I did a number of these where I was just using the fabric, and I was I mean, many people said that they could still see the figure in it, which I thought was really, really fun. But I always really liked this image. Yeah.
Yeah, I can absolutely see the figure. I mean, you almost just fill in the blanks with your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, and I want to mention, I believe, I think I know the answer to this, but is this just a regular domestic swimming pool?
Yes.
Terrific. So okay. So
Fortunately, it was actually they're not as common now, but it was a pool that had a very deep end because it had a diving board. So yeah, I had a lot of possibilities with that much distance. And so I often saw the pool as a kind of stage set that I could create something in. I mean, it's sort of an enclosed space and the light is always sunlight above, and then I could just kind of work out things within it.
okay. And of course, I'm assuming the current that's caused by the pump and the jets makes both your figures and in this case the material do some interesting things as well, I would assume. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So do you wind up sometimes like chasing it around the pool to get just the image?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
See, that'd be
Or
fun.
just doing it again and again and again and again.
Okay. So now we're getting to the pieces that the Appleton owns, very kindly gifted to us from Kenda and the museum project. And do you want to let's talk about the series a little bit first, and then we can go into maybe more specifics.
Well, for this series, this is so pre-pandemic, a friend put me in touch with friends of hers who ran a very small but very active floral business. And so I just got to know them, and the way it turned out, I've never had anyone do this again, but they would send out over the weekend these huge floral arrangements, and then they would all get returned. Who knew? And so I would go there on Tuesdays and go into the warehouse and just sort of walk off with whatever they had. And so it was really a great project because I never quite knew what I was going to come out with. It was sort of up to whatever event had been. And I would haul them over to the pool and they'd be sitting outside for a while, and then they would, start to kind of wilt. And if you look closely, you can see that, I mean, I often said it's a still life, although they were never very still, but it's sort of their last hurrah after the event had ended. And of course, the people who would make these arrangements had all this incredible chicken wire and stuff that they would create to kind of keep it all together. And sometimes when I would take them, they would start to fall apart. But yeah, so I called it Flora Aquatilis, which I think in Latin means underwater flowers.
Well, and it's interesting too, I think, because I don't think it's a direct correlation, but it somewhat evokes coral and all those other wonderful things that we associate it with life, floral-like life underwater. And I love the reflections you get. I mean, this is all reflection, this band.
Right. Right.
So I would imagine that's half the fun as well.
That was exciting to realize that if I pointed the camera up just a little bit, I could double the image I was taking.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at another one. So this must have been a really fun event. Look at these. And you've got them still, I see, they're in their vases, correct?
Right, right.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would have to weight them down. Everything has weights. I have a ton of fishing wire and various scuba diving weights because it all has to be tied down or it all just floats away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I had at the time, I had an acrylic box that I think I bought at the Container Store. It was designed to hold a treasured basketball or something, but if I filled it with water, it would sink, and then it could give me a little bit of a clear table.
Oh, that's a clever idea. Well, and another part of this too, once again, we're talking about contrast. Of course, you've got these very vivid, vibrant, fun flowers, and then you've got this sort of dreamy, waterscape with the ripples that are being illuminated, which is a lovely, lovely contrast. So for example, how long did it take you to capture the perfect image of this? Did you have to go up and down 15 times?
But I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, the time is spent on the setup and getting everything stable. And then it wouldn't be that hard because it's not moving that much. It's not like I'm chasing a model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another beautiful one coming up. So this one, of course, has human figures in it.
Right, right. And so kind of continuing with the fabric, and these two people were a couple, and they were just very excited to completely disrobe and jump in the pool. So I was trying to kind of get them a little bit more. They brought a lot of these fabrics. She was into textiles and design. And so I could kind of combine my interests of the figure and the fabric. And again, really do something with that beautiful reflection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's once again, you're masterful at getting just that right angles to where you almost become, in a good way, disoriented, trying to figure out which way's up, so to speak.
Right, right.
Really fun.
So I don't know, at some point, I can't tell you exactly when, I stopped using the film camera, the Nikonos, largely because it became more and more difficult to get film and have it scanned. It's kind of, I've been so fortunate though, I have used the same company and the same people to print my work since I started doing the underwater and the digital work.
Wow.
Digital printing. And so that image we were looking at earlier of Hannah on the red chair, a client came into the gallery and really wanted a print of that. And I could just go to this company and say, can you find that file? And they can, which is, I mean, if I had to find it, it would be really difficult. So that's been really interesting. And also, because this was printed in 2007, the technology has changed quite a bit. So they often, when they go to print the older scans, need to kind of really do tests and adjust and try to work it out with the new technology of printing. So fortunately, they're great people and spend the time to do that. So I'm very, very lucky.
That's fantastic. That's extremely rare that they can still, be with you. That's great.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the imagery and we're going to go back to us being on screen here. So there we are. So you're also, one thing we haven't really mentioned yet, until very recently, you were an educator. You're recently emerita. So do you want to talk a little bit about the education process and how you're teaching, passing on this wonderful torch?
Sure. I started teaching at UC Riverside outside of LA in 1979. And then after 10 years there, came to Texas to teach at University of Texas at Arlington. So sum total, I taught for 40 years. In many ways, I found that teaching was inspirational. Students would simply do things that you would go, what? How'd you do that? But it was also a process of constantly kind of bringing them out into the world, being able to talk about themselves and their work. Taking them to museums and galleries was always a huge part of my curriculum. And at University of Texas at Arlington, I think in 2000, I started to take students to Florence, Italy for the summer. And I did that every other year for 20 years. And that was really interesting. When I first started to do that, we were still shooting film. And they would have to go down this dank staircase in this building that was cool and musty, and go into this room and put film on the reel. And none of the girls wanted to go by themselves, and I had to go with them. But then after a while, of course, we went digital, and I would have them do a book, a self-published book of their pictures. So they would have to kind of consolidate their thoughts and edit a theme and make a book before we left. So those were great times.
That's fantastic that and then they have a book to show,
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yes, so that was really wonderful. I went to a school there that was started by a printmaker from UT San Antonio, and his daughter is now carrying it on. And so it has it had a dark room and a painting studio and a place where we could actually meet, and I could lecture and they could work, and we'd be there for a month.
Wow.
And boy, when you take a bunch of young adults out of their Texas environment and put them in Florence for a month, it's pretty amazing.
I can only imagine.
Yes. Well, that was good. But I truly love teaching. I had put in to retire in spring of 20. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and we all went online, and I just said, I'm happy to go do something else.
So that's the perfect segue. So what is the next step? Talk about what you're working on, talk about where you're going.
Well, as I said, I'm doing another underwater series. I upgraded my camera and my underwater housing. I've been working for the League, volunteering for the League of Women Voters. I've been trying to put myself in places where I can use my energy and help make a change. I recently took a test and am certified now that I can actually I can register people to vote and collect their forms and deliver them to the election office. So yeah, and I do a lot of other volunteer work and a lot of projects for different organizations. So I'm quite busy and quite happy.
That's terrific. So since you have so much experience teaching, as of course you know, we are considered a campus of the College of Central Florida, so we're part of that system. What advice would you give a student or emerging photographer to if they wanted to do this for their career? What would you tell them?
I mean, I don't know what's available. I mean, they could start with your collection, just to see as much work as you can. Try to study it. Go to museums, see what people are showing. And I think particularly now in these times, museums and galleries are focusing so much more intently on minority artists and minority issues, so that there's really quite a lot to be seen and to learn from. I mean, they're trying to show more contemporary people and contemporary ideas that I think are really exciting. I can't believe that someone in the, I guess, would you call it the audience? One of the participants saw my exhibition at the Arlington Museum of Art. It was a retrospective. And that's really wonderful that someone coming from Florida was able to see that. It means a lot to me.
That is fantastic. See, you people know who you are. People want to see your work. That's wonderful. So I think now is a good time. If anybody has any questions or anything they wanted to ask Kenda that hasn't been covered, we'd love your responses in the chat. So that would be terrific. Sometimes we have to kind of talk about other things while people gather their courage to write their questions. But if anybody has anything that we didn't cover that you're just dying to know.
That's a good question. The question was, do I crop now?
Yes.
It's still kind of against my nature, I have to say. So not unless I absolutely have to. And I don't do much Photoshop in terms of changing an image. If there's a pool drain, on just kind of things that are easy to pull off, or a leaf in the water that doesn't belong there. But I try to stay pretty much attuned to what the image is.
That makes sense. Thank you for that question, Suzanne. Anyone else have questions for Kenda? Well, we can also keep talking as well. Did you have something else you wanted to mention?
You had asked me what to say to a student. I think more and more now, young people need to figure out ways to be an entrepreneur. The photography studios have kind of largely dissipated because people can work remotely. Neiman's was based here, and Neiman Marcus had a huge studio that employed a ton of people to document their work and put it into catalogs. Well, no one's making catalogs. No, it's just the whole, and I personally think that the humanities in the university world have been really decimated. So I think teaching jobs are getting harder and harder to come by. It's just a very different world that people are going into. If you think of photojournalism, how that world has changed. So I think there are lots of ways to succeed, but I think one has to be very creative. And I know my university, former university, has a full-time person just working with being an entrepreneur and helping students think about how they can develop that. I think that's really critical.
I think that's wise too. Yes. It's a very different world than it was even 20 years ago.
Mhm.
So everyone's being shy, or you and I were very, very good at covering all the bases. Oh, here's one. Okay. I think it's Suzanne again also asks, I would like to understand more about your earlier work. Quote, hand color, end quote, your photos. Are they shot in black and white? Is the color applied over the negative? Could you please explain a little bit?
Sure. I did work. Okay, the dye transfer process was developed so that you could take a presumably 35 millimeter color slide, a transparency, and make black and white separation negatives. So you'd make one exposure through a red filter, one through a green, and one through a blue. And then those would be put onto what was called matrix film. And the matrix film was actually dimensional. It was a gelatin relief. And the image would be in there, and you would take the red exposure, and on the matrix film, you would put that into cyan dye. And you would take the other one and put it in a magenta dye, another one into yellow dye. And then you would print them on top of one another to make the full color print. That's really simple because you had to, you had to really control how those separations were. The density had to be, the highlights to the shadows. It was very complicated. So yeah, I learned how to do that. And I just said, yes, it does sound like layers in Photoshop. So I said, as I mentioned, I'll just take the cyan, magenta, and yellow dyes, and I'll make up my own colors. And so I would use one black and white negative, expose a sheet of matrix film, process it, and then I would apply those dyes with very soft brushes so I wouldn't scratch it over a period of time, and kind of layer it up and layer it up. And it's totally true. When I finally figured out Photoshop, I thought, I've gone to heaven, because it's all cyan, magenta, and yellow, and I know how to do that. I got that down. And so I could really understand the philosophy behind Photoshop. But actually, that's another thing about being in the darkroom. You would teach someone how to dodge a print, and they'd go, "Oh, that's how you do that in Photoshop." And we go, "Yeah. Well, so yeah." It kind of all morphed together. Kodak discontinued the dye transfer supplies late 80s. So can't do it anymore.
Okay. Well, and Dave says thank you. Excellent work. So that's lovely. I actually have a question. Now, I would assume that being underwater, you can have a lot of things go sideways, so to speak. So number one, I would assume you would have to be quite flexible. So have you ever had an idea in your head and it just didn't happen?
Oh, sure.
I mean, so basically you were underwater more or less all day and it just didn't happen?
In fact, I was trying to do it just this past 2 days. I was trying to photograph flowers that I glued onto a piece of plexiglass that was in a frame. So instead of framing the flowers, I'm putting the flowers on top of the frame. And the flowers didn't stick. And so my daughter came over to help me, and she said, "What about hot glue?" I went, "Oh, hot glue." So then I did a lot of hot gluing. And then her good friend is a food stylist, and she sent with my daughter, "Use this glue. I'm telling you, anything will stick, but you have to throw the plexi away when you're done." But so yeah, I've been doing that for the last 2 days.
Hot glue, you just can't beat it.
I know. I went, oh, yeah.
Well, I think that's encouraging to those of us who aren't professionals. It shows, so to speak, your human side, because I think a lot of us tend to think of wonderful artists like you as these almost like superhuman beings, and you sink the fabric and then you get the fabulous image. And I think we tend to forget about all the hard work that goes into that fabulous image that we see.
Mhm. Yes, there's a lot of trial and error. And I think that's the other thing, is that you have to not be afraid to fail. You can just sort of say, okay, I'm going to figure this out because it looks really good. Now, how can I make it? How can I control it? So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's going back to advice. I think that's an excellent thing as well. Don't be afraid to fail.
Right.
Even if you want to become an artist and you were serious about this, don't be afraid to fail.
No.
Well, wonderful. We don't have any more questions. Kenda, is there anything else you wanted to say or add to something that's been said?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I just, again, really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm going to definitely email all the people in the museum project and tell them about this great opportunity.
Wonderful.
This was taken on by a gentleman on the West Coast, outside of LA, and he got a group of us together, and he spent a number of years just reaching out to museum collections, and a lot within universities, which is nice because that offers you kind of an incredible study collection. And the universities would choose images and hopefully pay for the shipping, and we would make the prints and send them off. So it was just a great project, and has resulted in me getting to know you and you having my work in your collection. So it's wonderful.
Well, and we are very grateful. They are beautiful. And I did want to mention to those of you that are tuning in the Ocala, Marion County area, they are on view. All three of those beautiful pieces, the two floral pieces that are underwater, as well as those two figures wrapped in the beautiful gauzy fabrics, all of those are currently on view. So we want to invite you to come see them in person. They are absolutely lovely. We're very thankful for you, for your time, and for your incredible talent, Kenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. It was wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, before we all sign off, I just did want to say a couple of things very quickly. For those of you that may be new to this virtual series this evening, this is an ongoing series. It wraps up in December, so I interview one artist a month. The next artist is an extremely gifted painter. I am so excited to introduce him to you, and we can all speak to him and you all get to know him. His name is Andrew M. Grant, and he will be on Thursday, August 19th, 7 p.m. So we encourage you to come learn about his fabulous art. It is on view right now. He has a solo show on the balcony gallery in the Appleton Museum of Art, and it is just stunning. We encourage you to come see it, and then we encourage you to tune in to learn more about Andrew and his process. So thank you all so very much. We appreciate you tuning in. Again, thank you, Kenda. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.